and good evening, everyone. As I think everyone here knows, my name is Rachel Rosengard. I'm the Assistant Director here at Thayer Memorial Library. Tonight's presentation, Tramping Monadnock, is funded by the Friends of Thayer Memorial Library. You are likely familiar with their annual book sale, which is happening the first week of October. The monies that they raise during the book sale fund about 2/3 of the programming we do here at the library, both the adult programming and the children's programming, and we are tremendously thankful for their efforts. We are joined tonight, of course, by Bob Young, a New England native and Massachusetts author of 2 books about Henry David Thoreau, Walking to Wachusett, which he shared with us last year, and Tramping Monadnock, the basis for tonight's program. Bob will be telling us about Thoreau's process of map making, trains and telling time, the geography of Mount Monadnock, Thoreau's library, his pocket compass, his travel companions, his methods of travel, and much more. Bob enjoys spending time with his family, especially his grandsons, hiking, skiing, historical research, amateur radio, reading, and most importantly for tonight, writing. Bob, I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. The title of the book and the program, Tramping Monadnock, New Discoveries with Henry David Thoreau. Tonight, however, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. Those discoveries are my discoveries, the things that I learned as I was doing research, the things that kept me awake nights, that kept me going back up and down the mountain, going to libraries, going to Harvard's library, going to New York, looking for anything I could find about his travels to Monadnock. Some of them took a long time and they're not yet complete. Still discoveries to be made. And I encourage people to make that trip to Monadnock and make their own discoveries, because it has not all been discovered. There's plenty more that they can find. And if I found something, they may find something new and exciting to themselves. Typical pictures we see up there in the top, from down below, looking up at the mountain. Over here, once you get up to the mountain, you look off. But how much more is there between the bottom and the top? As you go up, all these things you can see, things that Thoreau saw as he was going up and down, things that he discovered, the things that he wrote about. He did extensive research on the plants. He did a circular path around the summit, taking note of all the plants that were up there. He did the same thing on Mount Washington when he traveled up there. He talked about the birds. He wasn't the greatest birder in the world, but then again, in the middle of the 19th century, birding, geography, science, it was all coming to bear. And he could go to Harvard, he could talk to the experts, but they were all learning at the same time. The rocks were fascinating to him, and they still are today. You can see some of the same things that he saw, even though we're hundreds of years later. Another thing he had to be aware of, how is he going to get there? He's got to take the railroad, or he's got to walk, or he's got to take a coach. Trees, he would explore even the dead trees, because they could tell him how old the mountain was, how old the trees were, the vegetation. Monadnock was not always a bare, rocky cap like that. In 1820 and 1818, there was extensive forest fires because the farmers, their sheep had been eaten by the wolves that were on the mountain, and they would set fire to the mountain and get out of control. So almost the whole mountain was burned off, and then erosion after that, and now it was left pretty much the top third is a bare rocky cap. It's growing back, but very, very slowly, as we'll see. He made 4 trips to Monadnock. 1844, he went alone, It was a one-night stay, and he was really headed towards the Berkshires. 1852, possibly with another companion. We'll talk about that in a minute. 1858, he had a companion with him for a couple of nights. 1860, 3 or 4 nights with a different companion. And all this is recorded in his journals, 14 volumes, over 2 million words. Between 1837 and 1861, he wrote almost every day in that journal. 2 million words, and we get a good idea of where he was traveling to and from, what he was thinking about, what he was recording. I've been a great traveler in Concord, he said. He knew everything in Concord. You can tell when he was outside the bounds that he knew, because then he would ask the farmers, what's the name of this stream? Where am I? How I came to this adventure, one reason only. I wanted to find his 1858 campsite. I had no intentions of doing this, no intentions of being here. It was for one purpose only, and that was to find the campsite. I read about Bradley Dean's trip with 6 other guys in the Thoreau Society Bulletin, and I said, hey, let me go up to Monadnock and find that camp. And I did. But in the process of doing that, the whole thing began to explode. How did he get there? What did he find? How did he set his watch by the compass? All things that he wrote about in the journal. What about camp number 2? A hog trough? It went on and on and on. So did the book, so did my writing, and many, many trips back. I did find that campsite, but as I read through his journal and what he had to say about it, I began to have my doubts. I'm not sure this is really the right campsite. These are the discoveries that we're going to talk about. These are sort of in order of the trips, 1844, 52, 58, and 60. So there's no importance here. They're just sort of random through those years, and finding campsite number 1 we'll get to. The first trip, he began in Concord. He was alone. He traveled the Great Road straight out of Concord, going through Townsend and up the 3rd New Hampshire Turnpike, 56 miles. He probably stayed overnight in the middle town, one of those towns in the middle, stayed overnight. He probably went by coach up to that point. He went to Monadnock, summited, stayed overnight, and then he headed west, Keene, in the Berkshires and the Catskills. He came back about 2 weeks later. The only writings we have about this, he wrote in his book, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. In his journal, he didn't have too much to say about it. There's a couple of references in the 1858 portion of the journal, 1860, where he mentioned that trip, but he doesn't give any details about it. In the book, A Week, he talks mostly about the Catskills and the Berkshires. But in that first trip, there is one picture that I found that was really interesting. Herbert Gleason was a landscape photographer born in Massachusetts. He did most of his work out west, but he came back to Massachusetts and really took a liking to Henry David Thoreau. He's well known for taking pictures about Concord and about the area. He wanted to find what was Thoreau looking at, where was he visiting, what was he seeing. So he's well known. He's got a couple of books. And he was very valuable in my research. Some of it was I just find a little piece and grab it, hold on to it, and then I may come back to it another year and remember what it was and start to put the whole piece together. Gleason's pictures help me. The picture on the right is one of Gleason's pictures taken in 1918 of Camp Number 2. And that's the only site that anybody has ever looked for Camp Number 2. It's never been challenged. I went looking for it. One of the rangers helped me find it. And when I got up there, I took that picture on the left. And as soon as you get there, you say, even though it's 100 years later, I know this is the exact spot. I've got the reservoir there in the middle. We got Wachusett way over here in the corner. You can't see it in this picture, but in his writings, he knew that Wachusett was out there on the horizon. My picture in 2017 is at the bottom. Gleason's picture is at the top. This is called Sunrise Overlook, and that's where Thoreau used to go in the mornings. Once he got up there, it was a short distance from Camp 2. He could see the sunrise to the east, and that's how he set his watch. We'll get to the watch setting in a minute. Sunrise Overlook. Here's another one by Gleason. Bathing pool on Pompelli. You mentioned Pompelli Trail. This is right on the Pompelli Trail. The top picture is his, and almost 100 years later, we take the same picture. You get an appreciation of how little things really do change in 100 years. So what's it going to look in the next 100 years? In 200 years? I came to this picture, however, and Gleason titles it his probable camp in 1843. That would be the first trip that he made. However, Thoreau wrote in his entry in 1858, there's a good place to be near the top, within a stone's throw of the summit, on the north side of the mountain, under some spruce trees. I passed over this photograph early on in my research. Okay, it didn't look too much important to me. But then I came back to it later and studied it. He's on the north side for his camp. That clearly faces the south. That's a south-facing picture. The profile tells you that. The lakes out in the distance tell you that. This is one I haven't found yet. Barb and I went up there last year. We looked for it. We couldn't quite find it. I think we're in the right area, but that's another discovery to be made another day. I'm not sure what Gleason was looking for, but it's not anywhere near the site of the first campsite. Trip number 2 in 1852. Thoreau started in Concord. He took the train to Groton Junction, now Ayer. Then he changed over to the Peterborough and Shirley Railroad. Took that up to Mason Village, now Greenville, New Hampshire. Then he walked. You'll see up here 2 people. He walked up through Temple, over to Peterborough, past Monadnock, and then on up to Monadnock. They stayed overnight in Peterborough and came back the next day. There's only one night on the mountain. Came back, took the train from Troy, Cheshire Railroad, back through South Ashburnham, Fitchburg, and back to Concord. With 2 people in the drawing I made, because he always wrote in this section of his journal, we did this, we did that. And people always assumed that it was his best friend, Ellery Channing. Many academics have written Channing accompanied him in 1852, and so on. However, I didn't go with that since he kept writing we. I wanted to find out who we was. And so, at the Harvard Library, and then at the Thoreau Institute, the Concord Free Public Library, I found copies of Ellery Channing's journal. This is a day before the hike took place, and Channing is barely able to walk, his own words. And he reported that several days even before the 5th. He continued to report it several days after the hike. He was barely able to walk, lame. There's no way he could have made that trip. On the 6th and the 7th, in his journal, an autumn day and fine, and he's talking about how it looks outside, fall is coming, he looks out at Wachusett. And then on the 7th, he says, rode, probably in a coach, bathed in White Pond. White Pond is in southwest Concord, so he's clearly not on the mountain. And he did not accompany Thoreau on that trip. We still don't know who we is. Don't know. Maybe it's just a figure of speech that he used in his writing. Finding the Peterborough and Shirley Railroad. This railroad never reached Peterborough and it never began in Shirley, but it still is named the Peterborough and Shirley Railroad. It begins in Ayer. It ends up in Greenville. Passes by Mason. Probably for financial reasons, it never reached the end of the line. Once he got up there, then they walked up to Petersham, stayed overnight, and then they went to the mountain. This is a bike ride on the trail. I went out to Townsend one day because I knew they were working on a rail trail. And out there on the right-hand side, you can see the railroad tracks. And it was that moment you say, yes, here's the Peterborough and Shirley Railroad that Thoreau rode on, going from Ayer all the way up to Greenville. More static pictures of the railroad as you walk through that area. I did meet a gentleman when I was walking through here. He didn't know anything about Thoreau. He didn't know anything about the experience of being in that area and riding the railroad to Monadnock, but he was real interested. So I gave him all the information. I sent him some more information on an email. And he said he would take it to the board of directors and they'd see what they could do with it as publicity for this rail trail that they were working on. Here's my friend Henrik Oderberg from Sweden looking at one of the tall pines that was bordered along the rail. Very interesting root structure there. When they completed the rail trail, that's what's left of it. It's a real nice rail trail. It's a fine walking surface, but some of the original remnants of it are long gone. It is now the Squanicook Greenways. There is a nice video they did. It's over there on the side. I'll give you that if you're interested. And it goes from south of Townsend Harbor up to the center of Townsend. If you go up to the New Hampshire line, it continues all the way to Greenville, and it's a real nice ride up there. So you can follow most of this railroad on rail trail. I went to the end of it and I said, yeah, there's a picture of the depot at the end in Greenville. And today somebody has purchased it and they're repurposing it with construction. It's an architectural firm that's in there. But it's so interesting to see the beginning and the end, what these things are. They're really preserved well, and really interesting to do the research on it. 1858, he went from Concord all the way on the Fitchburg Railroad. He went this time with his friend Harrison Blake from Worcester. Blake met him in Fitchburg, and then they took the train up to Troy, and they went up the mountain for a couple days. Interesting, when they came back, they walked back to Winchendon. They didn't take the train from that first step. Here's one of his sketches in his journal, and it shows exactly how they traveled. to the mountain. Here's the depot in Troy. Walked along 2¼ miles from that point. Road goes to Fitzwilliam, and then Marlborough and Jaffrey, that's Route 124 today, all the way to the mountain. The school was a little one-room schoolhouse, and that has long since been destroyed. The pond is there, and that's the dotted line is his route all the way to the mountain. I followed that route and made this little map just to check out and make sure everything was the same, and it is. I couldn't cross the road exactly as he had done. It's private property, so you got to go up the road a little ways and come back down. But this is how he did it. It's about 4 miles. When they came back, I mentioned that they walked from the mountain. You can see them walking over here. If he went back to Troy, they would have had too much time to wait for the train to come down from Walpole and Keene. If he'd walked on to Fitzwilliam, same problem. So they decided to walk to State Line and then down to Winchendon. But halfway down, where that red dot is there, I got a very good view of a mountain on a high hill over which the road ran in the western part of Rindge. So I got on my bike at State Line. I said, I want to find out where he went. Where was that high hill? And there's the high hill right there. I went up the hill, up the road, not knowing what I was going to find. It looked straight overhead from this pasture, and I said, that's it. It's got to be the high hill. No other place along that whole route where I rode that day. And I was following his roads from maps, old maps. So that was one of those I got it moments. A new reference document. He was a consummate reader. He read everything about history, about birds, plants. You couldn't get enough. He couldn't get enough reading material. But luckily, he lived for a period of time with Emerson, and he had access to his library. He had access to the Concord Library, as well as the Harvard University Library. Many times in his journal, he would indicate which references he had used, and every time I found one, I made note of it and said, I've got to check that out, just to make sure that what he was saying balanced with that reference. In 1860, he mentioned the New York reports, and I couldn't find it anywhere. The New York reports make them, Fringilla hymalis, which is the snowbird, makes them breed on the mountains of Oswego County and the Catskills in New York. This was an interesting discovery. But I couldn't find the New York reports. It took me 5 years of searching through online, looking for sources. And finally, I found Natural History of New York. Natural History of New York, the snowbird, Fringilla hymalis. The snowbird breeds, according to Dr. Brewer, in the mountains of Oswego County and doubtless other parts of the state. So just an idea of how long some of this takes to do the proper research to find what you're looking for. And this is part of why this whole story took so many twists and turns. It wasn't just about what he was seeing, it was my search for following along as well. 1860, he went with Ellery Channing. They went directly from Concord all the way up to Troy. They walked up on the mountain and they stayed for a few days. An upside down map. This map that you see right here is the one that you always see in publications. That's the way it's looking. north, south, and then east and west. But that's what you see when you look at his manuscript. On the left is the printed map. On the right is the manuscript. It looks like it's upside down. In fact, that is upside down. Did he really draw it upside down? Or did he turn his notebook and draw it that way? Why does the compass have to go north? Can't it be south? People say he turned it upside down, and I said, no, I don't think he'd turn it upside down. I've talked to some people in the academic field who say, of course he wouldn't do that. He drew it the way he saw it, and this is what he explains. The basis of my map was the distance from the summit to the second camp. He had that compass. He took the bearings to the camp. He took the bearings to principal points around the mountain. And that's how we drew the map. Here's what I envision. He's got his text written on the left and a blank page. The first thing he said was he knows the distance and the angle, the bearing to his camp. So standing as if he was on a mountain, that's what he draws. Then he puts in the other bearings that he took to the other major points of the mountain. Then he started to fill it in. And that's what he ended up with. So it was in fact drawn right there on the map. We turn it around and print it this way so that we can read the words that he printed on that map. But in fact, upside down, so to speak, if you insist on north being on top, that's exactly how we drew it, even though we printed out this way. The compass. All those bearings he took, he had to have a hand compass. But I wanted to find out, where is it? Can I see it? No one has seen this compass. That's a survey compass at the library in Concord. This is the one I want. He took the bearings on that mountain. So, where's the compass? Thoreau was friends with Ellery Channing. Emerson and Emma Lazarus met in 1868. Emma Lazarus, you may remember, give me your poor, you're tired, your huddled masses. That poem is on a plaque in the Statue of Liberty. So she wanted Emerson to approve of her poetry, and so she met him in August of 1876. So during that visit, the Emersons said, Channing, how about touring her around? He gave her a tour, and he was an elderly gentleman, and he was a little bit smitten with this nice-looking young poetess. On her departure, he gave her a copy of his book that he wrote about Thoreau, and the pocket compass that Thoreau had given him. And that is recorded by her two sisters in the book of her poems. That's the note. Whoops. Now I wanted to find out where Emma Lazarus's artifacts are housed. So I searched all over with emails, contacting different facilities in the New York area, and I found one, the New York Museum of Jewish Heritage, and they had done an exhibit on Emma Lazarus. In that exhibit was this piece of paper carried by Mr. Thoreau in his journey to the Maine Woods, White Mountains, and elsewhere, E.L. Emma Lazarus, August 28, 1876, the date she visited them in Concord. That came from the Lilly Library in Indiana University. And then I went to them, and they produced this note along with that one, But down here is the list of the province of the compass. Thoreau, Channing, Emma Lazarus, and somebody named R.W.G. The library told me R.W.G. is Mr. Richard Watson Gilder. But who is he? He was an editor in New York City, well known to John Muir, Mark Twain, Herman Melville. President Grover Cleveland visited. His wife was a well-known artist, and they had a home in Tyringham, Massachusetts. And they lived at a place called Four Brooks Farm. So I still wanted to know, what about Gilder? If he had the compass last, how could I find it? I went to his book of poetry, and in one of his poems, fairly lengthy, but it says, "Down on your knees," says Muir, John Muir, "and out with your compass, and by the way, 'twas Thoreau's, as Muir knows." I contacted the family out there. It's fourth generation. They still own the property. I think it's up for sale now, I'm not sure. But I visited them. They didn't know anything about this, but obviously they're looking, they're interested in the compass. Has not turned up yet. That's the farm in Tyringham. The cobble is the little hillside where Muir and Richard Watson were looking with the compass. And this is Reese Gilder Palmer and myself. He's fourth generation down from Richard Watson Gilder. No compass yet, but they're still interested in looking for it. I think I've got to rush along with time here, but the location of Camp 1, here's the map. Those 3 dots are where other people say the camp is. The yellow dot is where he indicated it was on his map. That dotted line, where the red line is his pathway across the road at 124 when he went to the mountain, and right up the mountain. It crosses really close to that yellow dot. So I went in search of the yellow dot. Again, it's close on the blue dot up at the top, but that's not where Thoreau said his camp was. Here's a picture of what's called Paradise Valley Trail. You can follow that. It'll take you right straight to the camp. When you get to the camp, he wrote, "I have a grand view of the summit on the north." And there it is. And down here, he sees the rocks of the southernmost summit. And that's Bald Rock down on the south. So if I stand right there where that yellow marker was, I can see what he wrote in his book. He also wrote about a chunk yard. In other words, a rocky yard. These boulders are as big as small Volkswagens. They come tumbling down off the top of the mountain. That's the chunk yard. He wrote about it in a letter to H.G.O. Blake. He also mentioned in Channing's journal, that the chunk yard is where the camp was. Here's a picture of where I see the camp. The view over those rocks is just to the left, and the chunk yard is to the right. Thoreau Bog. The Thoreau Bog is named Thoreau Bog. He named it the northeast swamp up on the right-hand side of his map. He called it he said the largest pool of open water was found on the southwest side of the mountain. That swamp is on the northeast side of the mountain. There it is there, blown up. Back to Gleason again. He took this picture in 1918, and you can't really see any clear water there. I would hope it would show more if it was there. But when Thoreau wrote about that bog, he said it was grassy and mossy without large bushes. You sank a foot or two, many fallen trees in it. buried in the moss. It must have been a dense swamp full of large trees. And then water found below that area, prevailing grass or sedge. So I read that and I say, there wasn't an open water there. It was a bog, it was soft, it was swampy. Today, open water, very clear, and that's not the same location that he said that he found open water. I walked around that and you can sink in. It's just like it was when he passed by, soft and swampy. How he set his watch by the sunrise. He said in 2 times, I set my watch each morning by the sunrise, and then also I rose at 4 or half past to correct my watch by the sun. I said, how do you do that? I can't tell you how many hours I spent trying to figure out how you would do that, because the only accurate ways to do that would have been done at the Harvard Observatory, where they had the right kind of equipment. How can you do it on the mountain? Well, the watch he had was spring-loaded. And spring-loaded watches, if you don't keep winding them, they'll lose time, minutes. And that's called drift. So if you know the drift of your watch, say your watch loses 5 minutes a day, and you can reset it each day at the same time, you can keep it generally close enough. Why did he need it close enough? He was trying to meet the trains, and the trains are always on time. The New England Association of Superintendents made all their trains, Fitchburg, Cheshire, all of them, the same time frame, the same time zone. So if he adjusted the drift of his watch every day, the way he saw the sun come up over the horizon, he would be close enough to getting his watch on time again. He did many sketches. We've seen one of them. This is one I didn't do a whole lot of research on. I just went up the mountain one day and I was going the right path and I stumbled on it. He called it, some rocks were shaped like donuts. And when I saw this, I said, that's the donut rock right there. You can't miss it. So these are the discoveries that I made. There's others, but these are the ones that stand out. After looking so many months or years, you say, yeah, I finally found it. So here's the hog trough. I've looked for it, I can't find it, and many others up there have looked for it. A triangular hog trough. It wanted one end and would have been quite portable and convenient for a farmer's yard. Maybe that's where it ended up. But nobody's found it, so if you hike, maybe you can find it. Thank you. Questions, comments, anything?
Amazing.
It was fun. It was an adventure, really. I started.
Found something that you were looking for? Did your heart start going?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. When you find it, a lot of the research, I could do the visual stuff up there, but looking online, you couldn't do this before computers and before all the search engines and things to look for. You can get into all sorts of libraries and documents and everything, so that really is a big help. But it takes time. And
You must have been driven to wait 5 years for some information.
That's just, like I said, I was just looking for the camp, and that's the way I am. Once I get going on something, we don't stop till it's finished. And so I finished the book, but there's still things I didn't find. I don't know about the hog trough, the compass for sure. So keep looking and hope. I hope they find it, because I'm not going to be finding it, but I hope the family finds it.
Are you still hiking up?
Oh yeah. Barb and I went up last year. In fact, on one of those maps, there's a swamp, and I'd never seen it before. And we walked across this trail, and we were sort of bushwhacking at that point. And Barb can tell you, her feet were squishing, and I said, yes, that's the swamp that's on the map that we never found. So it's, yeah, we love it up there, yeah.
Did you see the airplane? I think there's supposed to be an airplane up there.
I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it. There's a couple of mystery things up there that, there's a camp that some high school kids built, and they put it together with cement. It's really quite a thing. That's like a secret thing. Nobody tells you where that is, but we found that too. So, but that had nothing to do with Thoreau. So, all right, thank you.
Do you know how old he was when he passed?
1862,
Do you know how old he was though? He was 44 when
44.
he passed away.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
We did a lot of hiking.
He did Katahdin in Maine, Mount Washington. He did Rattlesnake in New Hampshire, just opposite Brattleboro. He did Fall Mountain in near Walpole. Wachusett. He did Wachusett. He did Greylock. So he did a number of mountains.
As we discussed before, he also lived at Walden Woods. Yeah. He lived there 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days.
There you go. There you go.
He did a lot of hiking around there as well.
Yes.
Whereabouts is that trough? Where did he say, was it like?
It's in an area he called the plateau, which is off the mountain about a third of the way down. It's a big, generous area. It's somewhat flat, but those of you who've hiked down White Dot or White Cross, you come off that rocky cap and it's sort of level for a bit, and then just before you dive down to the state park, that whole area is the plateau. He loved the plateau. It was where his Camp 2 was, and he just loved to explore there and see the plants and rocks. But it looked different than it does today. Today it's all grown up. Then with the fires, it still hadn't, vegetation was not full there, so you could see a lot of rocks. And so go look for the trough. Maybe you can find it.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm getting to 44, I might not have much more time left, so.
Just a kid.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.